Hello everyone and welcome to my project part 1 of 2. I wanted to use this project to look deeper into gouache paint and discover more ways to use it. I've been using gouache paint for about a year now. I really enjoy the medium. I love how opaque it is on the page and how it can overlap, changing colours with different effects depending on how you apply it. Here is where I first started originally, using paint brushes to see what patterns, textures I can make here, such as the sponge, dabbing it onto the paper, which makes a lovely bubbly effect. I'm also using my favourite colours, which are purple, blue, pink and a touch of yellow. I find that these are very harmonious colours and I really enjoy using them. So here I'm trying other different techniques with the sponge brush and the bigger brush, as you can see, by trying to again dab it on. I've also tried out here some kind of gouache washes with the paint being a little bit thinner. It worked out quite well. It kind of ends up a bit like watercolour paint, so it's great to do some overlays on top of your base gouache colours. Here I'm also attempting to try out a bit of acrylic paint to see the difference. I found acrylic paint to be more thicker and the colour was a bit more bolder, and it did work well when mixing it with the acrylic paint. It might be a case of where I use acrylics as a base and then on top use the gouache paints to add the details. Here in this next part I found some red plastic that I had around my art room, and I just wanted to see how dense the gouache paint was compared to, because I know with watercolours it's very hard to stay on something so shiny, because I think gouache is a bit more thicker, even though you can see where it's dissolved, where the water is in the paint, but quite a lot of it's still stuck onto the surface. Again, here I tried the acrylic to see the difference, and you can see it has stuck more better onto the ground, but I do like the effect that the gouache had, where it left patches of where the water was, creating some texture on there. I've put it away to leave it to dry for now. At this part I found some polystyrene and I wanted to try and have a go at it and see if it sunk into the polystyrene, but actually I was quite surprised. It really stuck on the top there, and I tried doing a blended effect with the gouache paints here, and hopefully it was going to start from going from dark pink to light pink, and it did work quite well. I think these paints are the Winsor Newton paints. I've used a few gouache paints and these seem to be the most striking with the colours, and that they are really good quality, so I do recommend them. Here the next part I tried was scrunching up paper. I do this quite a lot in my paper art. I love the texture it creates when you open the paper back up, and I want to try and enhance that painting over with the gouache. As you can see here, it's left some of the paper untouched. And it makes a really nice texture, perhaps for clothing. It could also be used for, if you've got the right colours, maybe like the ocean sea. I also did an illustration once based on that. There I put another layer of colour on just to create more of a texture. This next part I used, I found some origami paper. Actually it's quite really thin and it's a very shiny piece of paper, so I wanted to see if the opaqueness of the gouache really stood out on top of this. As you can see, as I applied it on, I may have had too much water in the gouache paint, so I've added a bit more white there to thicken it up, and eventually, as you can see, it did start to fill up, and again I left it over there to dry for now. This next one I used tissue paper, and as soon as I applied the paint on there, you can see how creased it became. It even sank through the paper, so it'll be interesting when that dried to see if it hardens up, as you would say. This next part I used another piece of tissue paper, and I used it as a dabber to create a stippling effect on another piece of tracing paper. It seemed to work well. I would use this actually again to perhaps put highlights and shadows on like different textures such as clothing. It could also be used on like fur, I suppose, when I come and do portraits here and there. The next part, I wanted to try out folding something over and see how it transfers onto the other piece. So here I used some tracing paper and just blobbed some gouache paint down and pressed it down, and as you can see, it did transfer most of the yellow. The blue was a bit missed, but again, that makes a really good texture because I did the dabbing for perhaps a lizard skin, but the textures are great that I was finding out as I was going along here, things that I could use it in my own artwork. This one was I've had a piece of leather, and I wanted to see how it worked on top of like an actual fabric material. It was a bit tough to put on, as you can see. It took me a few times going back and forth with the brush to try and make sure it's visible on there. I think it just soaked up the water so quickly that I just had to keep applying more and more on. But it did keep, as you can see, it did quite seep through. But again, it adds an interesting technique on there. And I suppose if you did a few layers of it, as so, it would eventually stick and not sink. Maybe even if you waited for it to dry and then did another layer on top, it probably would have worked better. Here I used a bit more of a watered down gouache, a lighter pink, and because the base was still wet, you can see that when I dabbed, it stretched out over the, like a watercolour would, and it worked out really well. I left that again to dry. Here I wanted to try something a bit different. I just wanted to play with paper, so I folded it in multiple ways and used some paint to then paint over the parts that were left showing. There you go. And then I left this to dry, and I will come back to it again to then do it again on top, so you can see the different techniques. But it created a cool different kind of, you know, an unexpected shapes in the square from the gouache paint. Here I've tried some soft felt. I folded it up and down like a fan, as you can see. The gouache paint, my plan was to dab it in, but then, as you'll see, I did dab it in the paint as a zigzag form, but it didn't really show up. I did use quite a thick part of gouache paint as well, as you can see here. I'm applying it, but the fabric just really soaked it in, and it was very difficult to see it once I've opened it up. I then also tried, once I opened it, to just do lines of paint. I mean, there, look, you can see it, but it's not very clear. So here, yeah, I was doing strokes of paint, just trying to layer it up. And to be honest, the material gave it quite a grainy texture. And it was quite interesting, actually, where perhaps I could think of cutting out shapes of felt and painting on them like this, and doing like animal body parts or clothing to put on my flat illustrations to create a 3D effect. So I thought this was quite interesting to use. I then tried a bit of acrylic paint, as you can see, which is the bluer paint, and it stuck out a bit better on the felt there. The next one, this was a harder felt, not a soft felt, so it was quite thick. I think this one wasn't as good as the soft felt. It just doesn't, I've never really been a fan of hard felt. I don't really know what I could use it for, and the colours didn't really go on there very well. As you can see, again, it was a lot of back and forth painting. I think I left that one to come back to at a later date. Once the polyester dried, I then brought it back, and originally I just wanted to paint around this feather to leave some marks so you could see the silhouette of a feather, but when I lifted it up, it didn't really leave much. But then I noticed I actually liked the feather in the artwork, so then I decided to paint all over it to try and stick it down, and blend the yellow into the blue to create a nice effect. And then I decided that it needed something else, so I just added a bit more around the sides to blend that in a bit more with the pink colours to make it stand out. Here we go. See, I'm just grinding it round a bit more with the brush. And then the next part I felt like if I did a bit of white splattering on it, it would really pop out. So here is where I did the finishing add-on to it. I really liked this miniature. It ended up being a bit of a miniature piece of art, which I enjoyed doing. This next part I used tissue, as so. It was just to see really if I could make anything with it. I put it away to dry until I go back to it later. This part I then come back to the shiny origami paper to then do another layer on top. With gouache paint, I find that when you do another layer on top, it seems to then blend with the bottom layer, because once you re-wet a layer, it then is usable again. So when you think of a colour that you want to put on, always be mindful, well, I am quite mindful of the colour won't be as the colour you've applied, unless you use like an acrylic gouache, which then sticks, so then when you put the colour on top it will not change the colour, because you can't blend it once it's down, it's permanent. Here I am again back with the paper once it had dried to then refold it a different way, and I just covered it with a bit of a lighter pink to try and see. As you can see, it's created a bit of an abstract painted areas on that piece of paper. This next part, I left this red plastic to dry, and I used the end of a brush and the end of a cutting knife to scratch into it. It actually worked out quite well. I did this previously in a previous project and I really enjoyed doing it. I don't really know how I could use this in my own art. Maybe if I did a piece of see-through see-through plastic to create, to put paint on the front, and then behind that put a piece of paper with an illustration on, and then sketch out with the end of a paintbrush, so to add details in the foreground perhaps. It's another thing that I do want to practice on at some point. This next one, this was a piece of black fabric. Originally it was for some blinds actually. It was quite like plasticky, but it was a material as well. I felt the gouache paints were very hard to put onto this material. It didn't work very well at all. I tried even using my fingers to fill it in because it was taking me so long to fill in the areas. I also wanted to try my Posca pens out. I've had these for a while, but they seem to be able to use them on anything. As you can see, they were a lot easier to use and a lot clearer than the gouache paints going forward. Here I had a bit of a thin piece of wood, so I wanted to try out putting the paints onto here. I think they did sink into the wood a little bit, as you can see. It wasn't as, maybe if I put it on thicker it would have worked better, but you can see it sinking into the wood there. I wanted to try something different with this, so I found some string out of my cupboard, as you can see, and I wanted to try and stick them down and then paint over it with a different colour. These pieces of string are just made out of paper. They're just like paper cord. And I'd read a book recently about using mixed medias, and using like cord and string like this in the work to create different effects was interesting to me. So I wanted to try it out and see how successful it was with the gouache paints. So here I've now stuck them down, and I'm going to paint over the top of them. It's quite enjoyable actually, using the string. I mean, if I was trying to make a piece of art, maybe I could use the strings to form a shape, or a part of a landscape. Like here, you could make it as though it looks like some mountains, and then paint each section a different colour. and you could do it like adding layers on it, to be honest, so it would be more bolder in the foreground. But there you go, there's the different marks it left using the string as an overlay. I then wanted to use the string because they were quite pretty with all the colours on, so I glued them down around the painting area I did to make like a little frame. It was just something to play around with, and sometimes when you're experimenting you just think of things on the go. So that was that. Yeah, I was trying to make a circle here to put in the middle, but it seemed like I couldn't. It would take me a while to hold it down while it was drying to stick down, so I decided not. And then I just finished the frame with some blobs of gouache paint just to finish the art off. Here's some cardboard I found, and I watched a video a while back about using cling film in, I think it was watercolour, but I decided to try it out with my gouache paint, and I actually really enjoyed the techniques this applied. I got a roller and, you know, splattered it onto the cardboard, and I love the effect. It's like quite oceany, like where you get the bubbles in the ocean. You could also use it, I thought, as like a background to a garden view or some foliage, but it created a great texture, and using like the three simple colours, even some of it blended together to make greens and purples, so it did work out very well. I didn't just want to chuck the cling film away, so I decided to try and use it as a dabber to see what other marks it can create when pushing it down. And here you can see me trying it out. This would be good actually, looking at it, by creating some cloud effects in the sky. I was going to keep the cling film, but it got a bit too messy, so I decided against it. I was going to cover it, the artwork, but then I decided not to. Here I found some more fabric, which was quite harder than the other pieces of fabric I tried, and it seemed to work out that the gouache paint took to it better than the other two pieces of fabric. I was able to create just some simple marks on there, just to demonstrate, and again I got a Posca pen just to add some minor details on there. The Posca pen kind of leaked, so I was just trying to turn the page to let it drip around and let it go where it wants to go. Again, it left quite a bit of a mess on my table, so I had to clean that out because it had gone through the fabric. After the cling film, I then decided what about foil, so I then tried painting on foils to see what I could use it for. I also used it again, like the cling film, scrunched it up as a dabber to dabber it along into the paint, as you can see. And then I got a piece of paper and again rolled it onto a surface, and there was the outcome. It reminds me of a field of wildflowers that mark could be made. You know, if you did some green in there and dabbed like I did for the flowers, it could make an interesting meadow effect. Here again I used a bit more bigger splodges, and then on this last one I did more to do with strips, to be honest, strips of paint, and I kept the original paint marks on. Oh, and also I folded the foil here to try and see what effect that would make. But it was an interesting, it kind of reminded me of a butterfly. And also the pattern on the foil was quite interesting, so I kept that. This next part, I folded the foil zigzaggy to see what the type of technique I could create. As it's like foil, or the same as cling film, the paint actually doesn't really dry on there. It probably would take a while for it to dry, but it's a good way to keep your paint quite damp. You know, if you're going out for half an hour or so, you could fold it up onto the foil, then reopen it, and it'll still be there to use. Here I folded it out, and then I stamped it onto the paper again with the roller, which is really useful, and I loved the effect that this created. It was quite a gradient actually. I didn't really plan for that, it just happened, and I love how it's splattered onto the page. It's made really interesting techniques. Another one that I'm going to look at to see how I could implement that when I'm creating my work, to be mindful of it. This was another piece of fabric. As you can see, it was mega shiny. It's quite a weird fabric actually. It was more polystyrene, I suppose. No, not polystyrene. I can't remember what the hard fabric is, but anyway, it was a really interesting one to use. I couldn't even get the sticker off, so I decided to paint over it, as it's just experimenting. But again, the gouache did go on, more so when it was wetter. When it was dry, it was quite hard to go on. I just tried out some of my fabric pens there to see how they place, and this white pen that I abide by when I'm adding white marks to the finished details in my portraits. It really stands out. Oh, this next part, I have a diary that's very old, and it's got this old rustic paper, and I wanted to try out using it, so I pulled a page out of it and attempted to paint a bit with the gouache. I wanted to rip the paper so it gives it different textures, and I liked how the white was coming out of the paper edges when you tore it. Here again, I was adding my pinks and purples just to see how to place and how they would come out when painting over another piece of the paper. It did quite sink into the paper. The paper is very absorbent. I do find that when I'm actually writing on the paper, but this was a great way to then tear the paper up and try and make a little collage actually out of the paper. I wanted to show quite a bit of the white because I've always enjoyed actually where the paper rips, how that texture is on the paper. So here I am, I'm just gluing down some of the sides now, just to form my little piece of collage that I made using that type of paper. That's it. And then the next one, I found a sweet bag. I just wanted to test out what it's like painting on a bag, and actually the colours came out quite bold. As you can see, I did paint the other side as well, just a light blue. Here I tried some plastic tissue paper, I would call it. It was very plasticky. It actually took quite well to that. It was quite different. I ended up putting some stippling on it, and then I found this piece of foil, coloured foil, in my art room. And again, the water was coming through quite a bit, but the more you applied on, the more it'd start filling up, so it wasn't too bad. But yeah, that's how the foil turned out. I then decided to get this netting and paint over it to get like a scaly effect. This piece I've had actually in my art room for quite a while now. I do use it quite often. I love the effect it makes when painting through the circles in the netted paper. I then tried painting on the paper and then rolling it onto the top, and it created a very good bubbly surface. And here I went back to the tissue, and as you can see, it made a really good scaly effect onto the paper. I recently saw somebody on Instagram using brown paper with gouache, and honestly their artwork was amazing. How the gouache paints really popped on the brown. So I just wanted to test it out here a little bit, but I will be doing some art soon on some brown paper, just to see what I can create on there. I think the brown colour in the background gives it a great, well, it's just different from using white paper. Well, that's it for part 1. I hope you've enjoyed my experiments. Watch part 2 for continuation of using the brown paper and more. Thank you.